I'm a landscape architect and a lover of architecture and landscape, both. I think there's real common ground there, and that's why I like to work with Mark and other architects all over the world on projects. But I have to start by telling you, one, I've been married for 26 years. I got the ring. I have 3 teenage daughters. I have 1 black Labrador and a wife, and a Ducati. Okay? And they all make me crazy, every single one of them. I have to tell you something about the old Pueblo. When I graduated from Harvard a long, long time ago, I was so fed up with East Coast culture. I had lived out there for 5 years. I was just like overwhelmed. I loved Thoreau, I loved all the realm of ideas, but I felt a certain way, and I had to come here. So I did. I went to work for James Turrell up on his crater, found out that he wasn't going to pay me a dime, and he said, well, I need to get a job. So I came here, I got offered a job up in Phoenix, didn't really like Phoenix, came down here and said, wow, this place is magic. And I took a job with Rogers, Gladwin, and Harmony back in those days. And I didn't last more than a couple years in the desert. Found my wife at the Club Congress. Beautiful place. She was just visiting, as a matter of fact, from Missouri, from St. Louis. And I saw her and said, I'm going to marry that one. And I did. And I drug her out of here screaming and kicking, and we moved up to Liquid Sunshine country up in Seattle, and we stayed up there for 23 years. So we moved back in Scottsdale, Arizona to teach for 4 years at ASU as a long-term, continuous visiting professor that kept visiting. And I did that for a while, and then I decided I would try Los Angeles. And now I'm here today. So why do I have a Ducati up there? A little bit about her name's Francine, by the way. My wife named it. When I came home with it, it was Thor. Didn't last long. She said, no, it's Francine. Okay. So Francine and I commute. I do about 8,000 to 10,000 miles a year on it, so I'm an avid rider. I love the thrill of driving, and I think you'll find that certain designers take risks, and certainly when you're driving a motorcycle at 56 years old, I think you're taking some risks, but it's calculated, you know, so I really enjoy it, and I will not ever stop doing it unless I can't. I grew up in North Dakota. This is my introduction to high art, and it's a buffalo. The city is called the Buffalo City, Jamestown, North Dakota. It's a big prairie landscape. I was allergic to it. I loved looking out the window, but I couldn't spend any time in it. I had bad asthma. So summers were horrible, winters were great, and that's just the way life was for me. But I fell in love with the landscape almost as a forbidden fruit, because I really couldn't get out in it for very long without getting sick. But now you'll tell as I go on how much I love plants and landscape and architecture. Mainly architecture because it makes my landscapes look good, sometimes. I'm really into a lot of different kinds of theories right now. I've been that way for a long time. I liked postmodernism when it came out. I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. It was a disaster, except it freed designers up. But right now, I'm thinking about big picture things, like Stephen Hawking. You guys all know who he is? The physicist, kind of an amazing man. The Theory of Everything, which is the greatest name for a book I could ever imagine, The Theory of Everything, described the beginning of the universe 14 billion years ago as a perfect blast of energy that had a ripple in it, which led to the less than perfect expansion of the universe and potentially the chaos that we formed from. So what I like about that is, this is weird stuff, metaphysical stuff, but I'm just going to start there and it'll get better. But if you imagine this beginning, if there was a Big Bang, if there was, it was perfect, and when it expanded, it should have expanded perfectly, but something happened in it, somebody touched it, and it went a little nuts, and out of that nuts came more craziness, and supposedly out of that chaos we formed. That's the theory. That's the one I like a whole lot anyway. Let's see if I can move this forward. My grandfather in 1915 was also a risk taker. This is the first piece of architecture on this land. It's in the prairies of South Dakota. He had to live on that land for 3 years. He lived on it 5, made a sod hut. That's all sod that he's using for insulation, and had to live there, eke a living out of that place. And but it's the first building ever built there. And that's my grandfather. His name's Carl. I'm Charles, but I'm thinking of becoming Carl soon, getting old enough. What I call my work is emo urbanism. Anybody know what emo is? Yeah, I like these. The pizza that slices itself, I wish my lawn was emo so it could cut itself. This is an attitude I have towards landscape. So emo urbanism is an attitude or a mojo that not necessarily self-pity, but certainly action, whether it's hair or weird shirts, whatever it could be. And then urban nature is what I call the outcome. I'm really interested in bringing urbanness back into the city. I've found in my life that a hummingbird can make my day. You know, I'm having a bad day, and as soon as the hummingbird shows up at your window, it changes everything. And we should all experience things like that constantly in our environments, wherever we live. It's from culture, from ecology, from art, in the fourth dimension. You all know what the fourth dimension is? It's just time and space together. So if you think of landscape, it really does change over time, and so we can think about that as we're designing. Because emo was controversial at ASU when I was teaching there, because using the word emo urbanism, everybody just kind of walked around, did he say that? And I said, yeah, emo urbanism. And I taught seminars on it, and we had a great time discussing it. But so I ended up calling it ecological modernism and took the emo out of it so that it could be more palatable. So playing with words a little bit. I'm going to go much quicker through slides here in a minute, but I want to, the meaty part of the presentation is now, and then I'm going to go through lots and lots of pictures. I love this thing because imagination is more important than knowledge. I don't think that's a quote, but that's the gist of what Einstein said, and I like the way he looks in this picture. The glasses are cool. Urban nature, like architecture, involves the making of place. Both are grounded in the physics of material, but the former is specifically guided by the landscape of time. So I've become fascinated with the idea of what doing a landscape in time is all about. Could we see this 100 years ago? Did we know it was there when they were building the pyramids? We didn't. Maybe some guy did or said they did. But we couldn't see it until we got out of our atmosphere in the Hubble and started to see things out there that were unimaginable. You know, these beautiful places are all over out there. But it goes the other way too. It goes internal. It goes to smallness as much as it does way out there in distance. Paradigm shift. Are these, what do you guys call these when you see them? Weeds. Is it a word? Weeds. What is a weed? It's something that doesn't belong there, a plant that's in a spot it doesn't belong. I like these if they are native a lot. If they're native to their environment and they can improve the natural environment, I think a paradigm shift to accept a weedy landscape is going to be determined soon. We don't have much choice. I call this place, I mentioned this, you know, out in the vast atmosphere, there's also what we don't see around us. I call that the thinness. I've worked, some of you might know who Gage Davis is. He's one that has a real understanding of site. He's a site planner that I work with on quite a few projects. But when we go out onto a site, there's something else there. And you can't measure it, you can't take a picture of it, but you can sense it. And that's what I call the thinness. And I'm always looking for that particular part in a project. His name is Robert Smithson, and he had the courage to make a beautiful structure out in the Great Salt Lake. The idea of his work is about entropy. Nature acts upon it. It's about time. It doesn't get built and then decay. It just changes. It becomes something different. It comes in and out of the water, and salts collect on it. I think he did a beautiful job of making this beautiful feature that might disappear for years at a time and then all of a sudden come back again. I like that kind of thing in work, in my work in particular, and I'm hoping to use it whenever I can. I also think he's great because he did a design once in France where he backed a truck full of asphalt up to a gravel pit, dumped it, took a picture, and got 50 grand for it. I mean, that's pretty good business, I think. So his ideas are amazing. So what did I do with that? In 1994, I started thinking about native landscapes in Seattle. And the very first one I did was about the size of from where I'm standing to the wall. And working with the Parks Department, they said, oh, those plants just don't do well here. You know, native plants, there's too much work. They're not going to do well. We did that first garden, and within 5 years, we had 25 projects in the Parks Department doing native plant gardens, mainly because they're good on maintenance, they're necessary, we needed habitat, and they're education rooms for kids in grade school and high school, and anybody else. So this notion is this: as a designer, we come to a site and we might have a blank slate up in the corner. We add this circle of, let's say, plants, let's say lupins in a perfect circle. We tell the client this is how much it costs and this is what you're going to get. But we don't always tell them what it might turn into. In the fall, it might turn like that. But the very next year, the circle doesn't look quite like it did, does it? It's changed. And then the very next year, what does it look like? It's completely changed. It may even have disappeared. Was it worth it to the client to do it? I say yes. The plants have to find their place in the environment. Or they're not, us forcing them to live in places and not working with them isn't going to work. You know, so I think over time we'll get better and better at that. I just like that idea. In the Northwest, these are some of the native gardens we did. This is our big leaf maple, which its leaves are about this big around. And they have every plant here has a fantastic story too. But one about these that I particularly like is we have a bumblebee up there that's bigger than a quarter. It's our native bumblebee. It won't sting you. It's beautiful. When you see it, you run, because you're sure you're going to die if it gets you. It's got the biggest stinger in the world. And it does it. It's really nice. It's kind of Seattle nice, too nice. It doesn't talk to anybody, just kind of flies around. But the beautiful thing about it and this leaf, when those all fall off that tree and stack up on the ground, in the wintertime, it's raining all the time. What do these guys do? They all crawl underneath the leaves to the bottom in the soil, and they all mass together and wait for 55 degrees, and then they all crawl out again. If you don't have the leaves there, they don't have a place to overwinter. It's kind of a beautiful idea. It's their own architecture. If you sweep the leaves away, you're not going to have that big, beautiful bee in your yard in the springtime. Just about every bug on the planet is active at 55 and above. Some a little earlier, but that's kind of the magic number, which happens to be the average temperature of the Earth on the upper crust. This is the garden I talked about that grew from just a little piece into a gigantic native plant garden in Seattle. We used old logs from inside the park to make nurse logs, which would mean a little bit different here in the Southwest. We had to tell people about it back then with interpretive signs because people didn't understand it. So we wanted them to understand what we were doing. We salvaged, sometimes this was an old landfill site called Genesee Meadow, and they couldn't mow it anymore because the ground kept moving. So we put these poles along the edge of the rough country and we let it go more wild. We added native plants to it as well. So it became this kind of a landscape. Within the first year, Savannah sparrow showed up, and it hadn't been in that area before there were, before habitation. So it was kind of cool. The other thing that happened up there, and the lupins would bloom, is near a part of the site, we found an orchid that had somehow survived all of the destruction that occurred there over the years. Somehow an orchid had survived, a native orchid. And so these little surprises happen. It's resilience of native landscapes. And then we did, this was a lake bottom, because they changed the lake, they lowered it. And this whole lake bottom area was just filled with maintenance facility things. And we wanted to get native plants out there in public, so we had to come up with really pretty designs to say, oh, they're gorgeous. See, look, everything is gorgeous. It's got geometry. I showed you that picture of the geometry changing. That's what happens to these circles. They evolve, they change in the landscape. But that's how we sold the idea. This is what we started to create. Box of Rocks amphitheaters. I think we made this in 1995. And surprisingly, this park, it's never been graffiti either. Nobody's attacked it. The meadow, the native grasses versus the mowed grasses. And this is another story. This is the Olmsted Park. And typically they have water or grass right to the water. That's not a sustainable condition, right? The wave action hitting it, undermining it all the time. So I got a little clever with this idea, and I got into an argument with an Olmsted expert landscape architect. I said, I wanted to create habitat along the shore because the habitat can take the water action. And it was argued that, oh my God, you're going to destroy the Olmsted vision. And I didn't care. And I do live Olmsted, believe me. I didn't care. And they're arguing against me, saying, well, it's probably 15 feet wide. It's not habitat. It's 150 feet long and 15 feet wide. It's not enough habitat to care about. It's on the lake. That is a lot of habitat. Very, very necessary. So I'm a bad boy. I get in trouble a lot. And I'll show you why. Because when we did the planting around the non-native willow trees, we didn't arm them at all or protect them in any way for planting. We left that part of the bank open on purpose because I wanted them to disappear somehow. Well, in the spring with the wave action, all of a sudden a big tree fell in. And I got a phone call from the Parks Department that says, in your project, we knew it was going to happen. A big tree fell in the water. We need you to get your contractor out there to get it out. I said, no, I want to leave it. And they go, we can't leave a tree in the water. I go, they fall in all the time. He said, no, you can't. We can't do that. It's a hazard. And I begged them, and they let me keep it. And they weren't sure why, but it was obvious within a short amount of time why I wanted to keep it there. It became incredible habitat. And if you're from Seattle, this became the Starbucks of Lake Washington for all these guys. They would show up like crazy because the dogs couldn't get to them, the people couldn't get to them, and yet we could watch each other. And they felt comfortable, you know, in that situation. So we're adding wildlife to our everyday routine. I've been in there a couple of times when the most spectacular thing happened. The big old eagle, all of a sudden you see him cruising in the distance, gets anywhere near the log and they scatter. And where do you think they go? Up into that vegetation on the shore to hide. Vegetation weren't there, they'd be picked off. You know, so those things are all related. People like it sometimes. In the wintertime, it looks different. And the lake gets full, drops up and down. And then another project we worked on was an old bog. It was another landfill. So a lot of these sites were kind of leftovers, what I call leftover urban open space. And this was covered back 50 years ago with about 3 feet of soil to dry it out. And underneath it was peat. We excavated and created this park called Rocks Hill Bog. And I'll only say that the biggest controversy on this were 2 things. One, the Fish and Wildlife guys were teaming with us, and they wanted me to do a little plot about this big and watch it and study it for 5 years. You know, study how the plants were going to do. And I said, we have the hydrology, we have the history, we have the soils. We don't have to study anything. We know what will happen. And Parks Department said they believed me, and so we went ahead and started building the project. It was wild how quickly things took over this. That wasn't the worst part. They didn't like me after that. I got in trouble with the Fish and Wildlife, and I adore them. I think they're doing great things. But when it comes to urban ecology, they want to make purism, and you can't. It's a different place. But what was more controversial in the public meetings were the grid. You can see I was starting to create a dialogue with nature that could be formed rather than the typical restoration plans. This is the next project. And these are, see those little green rectangles? Those were barracks at a project at Discovery Park. And when we received this project, we were to restore this land. They're going to tear out the barracks. So we made each one of those little rectangles into a native garden with native plants that would spread out into the site. And you can kind of see that's what we started with. And that's what it's turning into. And I'll show you a picture here in a second. And see those mounds? Inside those mounds are all the non-native plants that were on the site. So I'm imagining the archaeologists someday will come in there, dig in those mounds and say, what were they doing? They were burying all these plants. There must be some ritual going on here. No one was getting rid of them. Buggers. But you can see the way the paths cut through the houses. And I planted it with birch trees, which had white trunks and also aspen and alder. And one of the reasons I used the white trunk trees is because a lady there in her probably mid-70s said that her son used to deliver papers there. And she was sad to see the barracks go. And that's why I planted the white trees. And said, no, they're not going, they're just changing. And of all the people in the community, she became the biggest advocate for the project that you could imagine. Just for the idea that it was reminiscent of what was there before. And then in New York City, we won a competition to do a 1-acre rooftop garden at the planetarium. And that's sort of the image of the place. We worked very, very hard to make this not look like a real rooftop. And one of the ways we did that was by very heavy-looking stone. Everything was granite. Can you imagine setting a tree like this? We put the tree in and then the pavement. Imagine how precise we had to do it. I had a contractor on site trying to wing it. And I was like, are you serious? You're just going to kind of put that there and you're going to think the tree's going to fit? And they're big trees. They're huge trees. And I ran off to a store and I got him a laser and said, this is how you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to be exact. Or you're not going to fit the pavement around it. He did it with the laser and every tree fit perfectly in its place. Some of the things you do on site are really remarkable. It's just a beautiful place. Oh, another story about this. This is by Polshek and Partners. They have a new name now. I can't remember what it is. But when we were doing the project, we had neighbors like Madonna, Seinfeld, people like that, and Trudeau, Gary Trudeau. They were the neighbors. And they were all complaining during the course of the project that this is going to disturb their sleep because the building has a lot of light. Can you imagine somebody even worrying about that in New York City, about too much light? You know, so we turned it off at night. At 10 o'clock promptly, the building turned off. Within a week, the calls came in, please leave it on. Because it's beautiful at night. It's a landmark for people to find. New York's really good at landmarks. That's just people in the summertime playing on the water feature. And then I got to do a volcano. Before I came to Arizona, and before I lived out in Cambridge, I went to school at Washington State University. There's a volcano that erupted there, and it dumped ash all over me at school and almost made me leave the final part of the semester. I stayed, stuck it out like a good junior, stuck it out, and a few years later, after graduating, I got to be the design lead for the new visitor centers out there. One of the coolest places I've ever been to work with the volcano. And when we were working on this project, the only way we could get there was by helicopter. So all our site visits were in sometimes Hueys, big giant helicopters. I felt so cool flying in those things. One of the little helicopters, you know, I'm a site architect. I like to have things from the site. And so I grabbed these huge pieces of basalt called volcanic bombs on the site that we were going to put the facility. And I come running back with 2 of them like this, you know, running back to the helicopter. And he's looking at me like, no way. You know, I gotta have them, I gotta have them. He said, you can't have these in here, you know. And I said, I need them for research. Oh, okay. Then I But I had a lot of fun on that project. Later on, quite a bit later on, I got involved in a project called the Olympic Sculpture Park. How many here have been to the Olympic Sculpture Park? A few of you have? Recently? How many recently? Okay. It's evolving. It's an evolving piece of work. It got its name from the mountains in the distance. Those are called the Olympics. Here, let me get a drink first. I got cotton mouth. That's great. Okay, and this is called a Calder. It's called the Eagle. This is what the site used to look like. It's a brownfield site. It was storage for petrol, storage tank facility. And we had 3 parcels down below belonged to the Parks Department, and the other 2 were privately held. And this, Weissman Freddy were the architects on it, and this is how they imagined connecting 3 sites, was with this, this image, which I love. I think it's a great metaphor for the pathways on the site. But it didn't really have a soul, it had a way. And so the whole idea of the native plant palette and the topography that had to go with it became what the park was a lot about, besides the sculpture. And this is one of the early sketches that shows going from the mountains down into the water with the landscape types. This is the biggest native oak that's ever been transplanted that I know of in Washington. Nobody thought it would live, but it really loved its spot, and it's thriving up in that corner. And what I like about it is the argument there at the time was, should we put 3 trees there so we have mass, or should we do 1? What would you guys have done? 3 trees? Maybe? No, 1. Every time. That site said 1 big girl. It needed the matriarch of the park, right up there in front of everybody, taken over and demanding what the architecture was trying to do. They needed to be together on the site. It was right next to the pavilion. It'll be the most incredible tree. It'll take a little while. But that's what I said about the 4th dimension. Our stuff takes time. The amphitheater nearby it is used for all kinds of things, including laser light shows. The valley has this incredible sculpture by Richard Serra. And Richard Serra, when he was coming to site to look at if he wanted his piece there or not, the architects at the time were worried. And I didn't have a great relationship with this architect, so I'm going to put that on the table. We designed very well together, but we didn't get along in the end in particular. That's a whole other story. And if you want to hear it, I'll meet you somewhere out. But putting the Calder in there was a worry that Sarah would go, oh my God, those trees are going to get too big. They're going to compete with the structure. When he used more explicative to describe the trees. You know, when he uses explicatives like I won't use now, it usually is a good thing. And he said, bring on the blank and trees. I can't wait till they grow up, and you know, and on he went. I figured he would think that way. He's just that kind of guy. They are beautiful in the garden. They're called wake, and it's wake after a funeral for a friend rather than wake like a boat, which is what they actually look like. You can look in the distance. I planted what's called dawn redwood in the back, and almost turned the same color as the sculpture when they're in full color. People love walking through them. They're not supposed to touch them, but they can put their shadow on them. People touch them all the time. They get in trouble. I use them as a foil for some of the native plants that are beautiful up in the Northwest. I'll go through quite a few of them here. That's our native dogwood. And then we have a ginkgo tree, which was on this planet when we were all one continent, the ginkgo, which is native to China now. But it used to be here. You can get petrified ginkgo all over North America. I brought it back only for the garden at the base. Everything else is native. Birds like to land on the sculpture. They get chased away because they deface the sculpture. So sculpture is a little, that bothers me. When you have a garden out, when you have sculpture outside, don't you think things are going to touch it? And shouldn't people be allowed to interact with it? I mean, it makes no sense to me to have someone running around with a ruler, smacking your hand when you touch it, or giving you, and there's signs all over, do not touch the sculpture, you're damaging the important property, who gives it? So there's a dawn redwood in the corner, again too, beautiful, beautiful trees. This is called the gallery, with the fall color of the native dogwood. And underneath it is a sea, when they're in flower, of irises. The sculpture's in it too. There's the dogwood. There's another plant around there called Ribes sanguineum, which is red flowering currant. Inside out flower, beautiful plant. These are all native plants. Goat's beard, another native plant. These are the irises that were all underneath that sculpture. In the springtime, for about 3 to 4 weeks, it will be a mass of this beautiful color. Beautiful plant. The meadow has the columbine, which I think you have here as well. And in the distance on the main path, you can see Mount Rainier on the 1 or 2 days that you can see the sky. So we can design for it, we just don't guarantee you're going to see it. We made the chairs match the main sculpture on the project. They're really cool, and we made them to be movable, so people could move them around. And creative people react to the sculptures on the site. Somebody overnight, this arrived, it happened during the nighttime, somebody snuck in there, made a little nest and put some baby Calder eagles. Didn't get to stay too long, but it made quite an event when it did happen. There's a few other things that happened. Like, anybody here know what this is? How many know? You have to be over 40. Okay, you get to say what it is then.
It's an eraser.
Of course, everybody knows that. No, it's an eraser. Paul Allen happens to own this one. Back in the day when typewriters, you'd erase the letters, then you'd use the other end to sweep them away, back up and type the letter in again. That's what we used to do. It was high technology. A beautiful piece. You can see it in the meadow with the lupins. This is the first season of wildflowers out there. The cool weather turned everything red, the leaves, which is beautiful. And then in the springtime, the flowers came out. This is called Farewell to Spring. This whole hillside, all the meadows were covered in this. And what was great, people were coming to see the park, and they were picking this flower because, you wouldn't pick flowers normally in a park because you would think someone would get upset. There's no way anybody could pick all of them with so many. So they picked them and put them in their hair, in their ear, and walked through the park with them. It became sort of a great surprise. That's the beautiful flower itself. There's that giant bee I told you guys about. It's a beautiful thing. Wildlife shows up. Another sculpture in the meadow by De Subero. A Roxy pane, a tree you don't have to water. I saw this tree, it's all stainless steel, covered in, what are those things, crows. There were probably about 30 of them on it. It was I wonder what they were talking about. This thing's cold. But they perched. I don't think I ever saw them again. They're pretty smart birds. This is the meadow. This is the grove of aspen trees that we put in there for instant effect. You can see the meadow on the other side and the sculpture within it. Now, these plants, which are really incredible plants, I think you have them up in your Flagstaff as well. I know you do because I've seen the fall color up there. We put them in a perfect grid on the site. Do you think we expected them to stay that way? Absolutely not. Do you think I told them that they would stay that way? Yes. Oh yeah, big grid forever. Otherwise, they wouldn't let me do it. And then in the document, I wrote that selectively remove the youngins, not all of them. And within no time, there's a whole bunch of babies shooting up in the park. And it's going to become a real grove, not a man-made grove. And things will do better. There's the fall color. We embraced the train. Became part of all the urban influences of the city are part of our park. And we expected it. We didn't try and hide anything. If you're coming to this park, you can expect to hear the train. There's the walkway down to the ocean. That's a rain garden. How many know what a rain garden is? You guys are kind of like really good at them here, and not so good up in Phoenix, but much better here at learning and understanding rain gardens. In Seattle, where it rains a lot, pretty big on rain gardens, which is weird. But we do them really well. And in this park, the whole lower section is a rain garden, collecting rainwater from all the adjacent slopes and paved surfaces. The problem with the park is that we ran out of money when we were constructing it because concrete went up in price radically. And so they started taking out some of those cool features, like we were rainwater harvesting at the upper garden, that all disappeared. Because we're a park, we could just shoot it straight into the ocean, which was a big, big loss for me. But I was able to keep the rain garden down below because it was cheap. But I will tell you a story about that. And when I went on site before all the plants were in and all the grading was done, I showed up and I saw, in order for this rain garden to survive, it needed a weir at the outlet to keep the water level up, because underneath it, it's all paved, so the water doesn't go into the poison, right, and soak it into the ocean. And when I got on site, I didn't see a weir there. It's just a concrete little dam. And I'm walking with the project manager for Seattle Art Museum, and I'm looking over and said, "Where's the weir?" And he said, "Oh, we beat it out." And I freaked out. I've never had such a fit in my life. I couldn't believe they beat out the weir, and I had created a plant pellet made for that water situation. If I hadn't been there on that day and saw that weir was gone, everything I planted in there would have died in the springtime because it wouldn't have had the water to support it. These things happen in our projects sometimes, and somebody doesn't really, he really won't miss it. He doesn't really need it. You know, and when you're creating a landscape, it's integral to the way water moves and the way the soils are done on the site. On this project, we use all native topsoils, but I learned a lesson about that. If we stockpile our native topsoil, what do you think happens to their microorganisms when you stockpile it? They die, except for the ones on the top. I learned that from that project. So we had to wait. So when we first built the project, the mycorrhiza that needed to be in the soil took a little while to build, and I knew the plants were going to have to suffer for a while.
Yeah.
And they're there in force now. This is a sculpture that I love to talk about. I think I have 2 pictures. This is a great story because at Seattle Art Museum, they had a donor, a gay donor, that said, "I'll give you $1 million for a sculpture if you put a nude male in it." Because in all of Seattle, there wasn't a sculpture with a penis. Excuse me. There wasn't. There were females around, not with penis, but females all around Seattle, mermaids and everything else, but no men. And so that's a very delicate thing anywhere, even in Seattle, the discussion about what this could be. So what did they do? They asked Louise Bourgeois, a recluse, a famous artist recluse in New York City, to design a sculpture. She came up with the idea of father-son love. It could be taken a lot of different ways by different people, but what you end up with is a male sculpture with his anatomy and his son on the other side, right? And so this water comes up over one, and the two never get to see each other. It's sort of like that dialogue that father and son don't have. But others took it to mean all sorts of other things, you can imagine. And my little daughters at the time would stand there and wait for the boy, you know, for the water to drop. Dad, when's the water going to drop? She did these beautiful eye benches, you know, that people sit in on a nice day. And then there's another landscape architect that I adore. His name is Richard Haig. Have you heard of this guy? He's an old man up in Seattle, still practicing in his 90s. And he did Gasworks Park up there, and I worked with him for a few years. And when we were looking for a tree for this sculpture called Love and Loss, we needed a bad tree with a V. If you had he had a nursery, and I knew he had crappy trees because he's too lazy to take care of them. And so I called Rich up and said, "Rich, I got to get one of your trees in the park. Do you have any, crappy trees?" And he said, "Well, no." And he had a few. And I brought the museum and the artist with me up there, and we tagged a crappy tree, which was perfect for the project. It was a crabapple, and it was from Richard Haig. And for me, it was a victory because I wanted a piece of what I think is an incredible landscape architect, a part of a landmark piece of landscape architecture in the city. The other thing we did was pretty cool is we created a place in Seattle where you could get to the salt water, because nowhere along the waterfront could you get to the salt water before. And that's what we call the Cove. That's what it looks like. And we had the most beautiful present We didn't ask for it. Somebody prayed for it, I'm sure, and it came. But right after we opened, a huge 100-year storm hit Seattle. Our trees didn't move, nothing got knocked over, but it dumped every log imaginable up on our shoreline. It dumped body parts, I mean, all kinds of things came in on this thing. But we couldn't, we would have had to pay, you know, unlimited amount, I mean, $70,000 for this much wood to come on one evening. It all showed up. Spectacular. And people loved it, you know, they played with it. They made their own sculptures out of it and admired their great work. And then, of course, the people at the art museum had their guys over, take them down. Someone's going to get hurt. They're going to walk under that, and they're going to get hit. People did it, you know, people like to mark territory, especially in natural situations. They like to feel like they're somehow part of nature, and when they do these things, they do those. I think we need more places like that, where people can interact with the environment and not be so sterile. We get snow up there, and it is an amazing thing. When it does come, it lasts maybe usually a day, sometimes a week, sometimes two, if we get cold weather. It's beautiful when it happens. And we get sunsets. So that's the sculpture park. You haven't seen it. Just a few more projects. How much time do I have? Anybody got any idea? 15 minutes? Okay, that's about right. You guys want to see a little more, or are you done? Okay, I'll get into some contemporary, some recent work too. I work in China a lot. As a matter of fact, I bought this incredible shirt that you guys all love, right? It's got dragons on it. You know, and I said, this is a manly shirt. This is one I can ride my Ducati on. And so I asked my students what this symbol is. It says happy. I go, I did not even, I thought it meant something like death, dragon. And it's happy dragon. You know? So I didn't even know the karma was there at the time. This is a project in northern China on the water. It's near Boston. It's called Dalian. It's called Kingdoms of Discovery. And it's just crazy what we did there. We moved in 3,000 fully mature trees. Most of them were 30 to 40 feet tall. They moved them in the wintertime like giant ice cubes, because that's how they could move them. Incredible what they could do in a very quick amount of time. Just give you an idea of the scale of that project. It's my Disneyland, hopefully my only one. Then I got crazy ideas up in Seattle about saving nuclear power plants after they've been not used. And I wrote in a paper, it said, I heard they're going to spend $100 million to tear this thing down. And they said, it would be a great park, be a great place to keep. And sure enough, that's what we turned it into. It's a business park. It has if you've never been in a cooling tower, I recommend it. It's one of the most beautiful places you could ever enter. I've been to cathedrals in France and other places that are stunning, no more stunning than this. I'm telling you, you walk in, if you like nature, you can see birds riding on the wind up above you. You can see moss coming down the side. It's just incredible what those towers are like, especially when they don't have nuclear stuff in them. A sense of scale of these things is unimaginable. And the beautiful, this should make Terrell kind of go, oh. Right? This is big time. Yeah, this is big time stuff. And they make also a nice silhouette on the sky. They're sort of sacred and profane. That's another big thing in the work that I'm involved in. I like the opposites. I like opposites to be very prevalent and powerful in any design. Working with Nike at the University of Oregon, quite an outfit. They built this amazing facility, and we were the landscape architects on it, working with ZGF out of Portland. And I call it the glass box inside a glass box and black table of water with birches. I couldn't think of a shorter name. And this is what we ended up building. There's 2 skins on that building. There's a infinity edge pool all the way around it. Those are the birches on the side. It's them on the typical gray day. Beautiful cascade. You can see the infinity edge of the pools. The water spills over the edge all the way around this building. I don't know how many miles of it there is, not by miles, but there's a lot. And that's all done from one pump, if you can imagine. And the infinity edge is on the outside, and it's around the whole building. You can imagine what they had to do to get the engineer to get the water to flow evenly. And then, see those key card things in the middle, those little things sticking up? That's a key card. That's for people that aren't going into the building like students, it's people that work there. But when they're crossing that little path there in the water, it looks like they're almost walking on water. It's sort of a metaphor, you know, for their position. in the world. Turned their bike racks into the organ. You know, the organ symbol is the O. I turned that into a bike rack. I did this in solid stainless steel, throne and not finished. And when they came on, you can see the rough finish on them. You know, when they, and why do you think I would do that? If they were fine, then I don't think people would want to use them as much. It would look like sculpture rather than as something utilitarian. When they arrived on site, the architect said, "Oh my God, Nike's going to have a heart attack when they see that. These are unfinished. It's not the way we do it." And I go, "I don't think so. I think Howard would be fine with it." Howard loved it. He got it right away. And that the roughness was sort of the character. You know, athletes are rough, tough people, except if they're there. Then another project is at David Chipperfield up in Anchorage. And we did a $100 million expansion in a 2-acre park. I love fighting with Chipperfield. Chipperfield's an English architect. He has, I don't know where he went to school to get this, but he's got a twitch in his eye when he talks. I think it's fantastic. He's got this amazing accent. You want to listen to him no matter what he's saying. When he says the word aluminium, you just pretend like you know what that is. Nobody knew what he was. He was talking to all of Anchorage saying aluminium, and nobody, 90% of the audience didn't know what that was. It's probably expensive though. You know, probably an English thing. He was wonderful to work with, though, and anytime he got angry with me, which was not too often, mostly over politics, what he said is, "You know, I can make this a 1-story, it's a 4-story building expansion. You know, I can make it a 1-story building. That's what that would do to my park, make it a half-acre park, a courtyard, basically." So he kept saying, "I'll threaten you again, you know, I'll make it a 1-story, that's it. You know, fall in line." This is what we ended up building, and minimalism meets nature in this project. That's just after it was built. And what we did is sometimes we get on these projects, they want to make a big deal out of it, and they invite all the media guys, and they sat me down with Chipperfield, Chippy, David, and we sat across from each other, and we hadn't really met. And the worst question comes to me. He says, "Now, Charles, now that you've met David and you've seen the site, what would you do with the park?" And David gave me the old twitchy glare, like, what's he going to say? And I said, "You know, after driving around, I saw all these beautiful trees." And I said, "What I would do is I'd go out there and grab a big bunch of them, and I'd throw them in front of the building and be done with it." And he had the biggest grin on his face. You know, I didn't think, you know, he doesn't smile a lot. You know, that's sort of a London thing, I think. You know, they laugh a lot, but they don't smile a lot. And he's sitting there, he had a grin, and he liked that right off the bat. He was so afraid I was going to program a park into this thing, an American-style park. We did our programming, and I can't stand too much geometry. Our grid without the balance, okay? The grid of the trees comes off of the columns in the building. Nobody cares but David. Right? This is cool, right? So we pull that all the way across. They start farther apart, and they get tighter as they move towards the road on this side. We cut rooms into the forest for activities and for placement of sculpture. And then I call it the Chugach Wiggle, which is named after the mountains there. The Walk of Alaska winds through the park and ties those places together. And it's all, this entire park, except for this avenue right here, is all native. Well, grasses aren't, but that's got a plant or a crab apple in it. You can see that. This is right after it was built. This is a little later on. I love this building. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Sometimes architecture can just do wonders for landscape. You know, and usually it's the other way around, but it can really be a collaboration that's can be really beautiful. And he loved the birch trees for one thing. Alaska is a tough climate, and that garden could be empty all winter long. And the trees are always there, and they're always different, and they're always changing. This is called hoarfrost, not with the W, with an H. And it happens a lot up there. It's beautiful when it happens. And there's lighting in them, you know, so they celebrate things on this particular project, but it's a native plant project. It's urban nature. Another, what, 5 minutes? Okay, this is the International Peace Garden. I grew up in North Dakota, and I got a chance to redo a 2,400 acre garden. Can you imagine that? In North Dakota? Did you know that? No. They had 50,000, in 1939, they had 50,000 model black Fords show up for the opening, because we were really sure that Canada was going to invade America. And so we had to create a peace park between us. That's the whole purpose of this garden. And this is sort of the layout of it. Oh, that image that I showed you. Wait, stop it. That gives you a sense of scale. The peace garden's in the middle, and those red things are the same size and scale. There's Versailles, there's Washington Mall, and there's the National Peace Garden. I think the scale is really interesting, how big this particular project is. We did the master plan for it, and they have hoarfrost there too. And this is what the garden, we didn't do all this part. We did the second garden in the middle, but this is the setting that we had to work with. Historic horticultural masterpiece. This is what we redid in the middle part, in a new building, which you can see in the distance, using the water, different ways of crossing the water. This architect is crazy. His name is Guy Prefontaine. And you know those mustaches that curl up like this, like Snidely Whiplash? He has one. When I first met him, I said, you're kidding me, right? They don't really have those. And Guy is pronounced Guy in Canadian, French-Canadian. But he's known, his company is known for buildings that leak because of that inverted roof. But he still gets to do them again and again. I think it was sort of like Mickey Mouse. We had an interesting battle on this project too. You see the little building in front of it? Can you guys see that? Right in front, there's a little building in front of the building behind it, which is a new visitor center. That was a WPA building. And because it was in front of the building, and he's a good architect and he's a wonderful guy and all that, but he wanted it out because it blocked the view to the building. It had to go. I convinced him by two ways. One is I moved his building back and lifted it. And then I made that building have its own rose garden. So it's like there was the rose garden with the building in it, and then there's his building up from it. Where did I get the up from it? From China. Everything important is up. You go up into everything. And so, and I didn't tell him that's where I got it from, but he liked the idea. I think subtly it gave the building the respect he thought it deserved. This is for the owners of Costco, called Tables of Water, all infinity edge pools. That's a swimming pool. They have their own Turrell. This is what it does. This is the waiting room inside the house. It's a 3-bedroom, 12,000 square foot house. Olson Sunburn was the architects. But you wait in here, and that's what the thing does. And then if it's not raining, the roof opens up to do ocular to the sky. This is some of the trees we salvaged for the courtyard. This is what it looks like at night when it's wet. These are Chihuly's balls. I mean, that was a bad joke, right? I've said it before. I was waiting for a quicker reaction. It's kind of nostalgic, but they are. And in the last earthquake, they rolled away. It's pretty funny. I'm working with another really cool architect named Carlos Zapata out of New York. This is a project we're just finished, a Marriott, JW Marriott in Hanoi. This is his building. And it's a convention center also. That's the landscape. They make landscape very differently than we do. It's a big project. The building has immense cantilevers on it. Funny way of handling trees. And then this idea, see these little black pots in the water? They're not done yet, but they look like tires, kind of. And what they are is this lake goes up and down, and there's a beautiful plant called lotus. It can't take that movement of water. It won't survive. So what we have, these are all planters with lotus in them, and they're lit, and they also have water going into them constantly. So they're always spilling water over the sides, over the black granite. And so as soon as those are lotuses and beautiful, it'll start to work, and you'll see them out in the water at night. They'll glow. But the reason we use lotus is because they had a myth. Carlos's building is a dragon. That's what its kind of metaphor is. And we found a myth in Vietnam that said the dragon mated with a human, and their children were people of the mountains and people of the water. So the plant I picked for people of the water is lotus, and the plant I picked for the people of the land is the fig tree. Those are the mom trees. And that's what basically surrounds the building, is those two particular plants. And that's why I went through great extents to create these places for lotuses. And they built them, which I was surprised. Another one with Carlos is a stadium in Haiti. And in this project, we're moving to native plants that you can eat. So this entire landscape can be eaten, including the rooftop. And the water feature around it, the moat around it, is for raising tilapia. So that can be eaten too, date palms and all sorts of things like that. And that's the other project. Oh, does that look right? No, we'll skip that one. We'll look at that one. This is a park I'm doing in Hanoi as well. I'm going to just kind of run through it. I'm going to show you just a few projects I'm doing now. The thing is that this is a slope plane going up, so the water is coming all the way down to the bottom and going back up again. That's why it has this sort of unusual shape. This is a project we're doing in Toronto, and it's where they have that giant tower. You know that tower? It's called the CN Tower. It's big, much bigger than the Space Needle. When I saw it, I was like, really, boy, that's a hell of a needle. It is big. It's amazing. And we're redoing the garden or the landscape around it. And this is my typical sketch that I like to do. I still like to draw. I work on two things. I work with red on trace, and then I work in this handy dandy little thing. And I draw all the time on this, and I'll show you some drawings that I do on that in a second. And then we're just about done. That's the site. There's 4 high-rise towers, and we're leading over the railroad tracks. It's a pretty cool project. The latest one is doing a project in Athens. I'm going there day after tomorrow for another workshop. And this whole site. It's everything, almost everything you can see on the lower portion of this image. It's Athens, Greece. There's another one of my little yellow or red sketches. And this is the kind I do in my iPad. The red sketch is underneath there. I make a JPEG, send it over to my computer, and then I draw these conceptual drawings. And then I can fire them over to wherever I want to, to London. I'm working with Foster & Partners on this one, and pretty good architects. And then another variation on that idea, there's also a big, what do you call it, airport runway in the project that I want to keep in one fashion or another. And then I'm going to end with this. These are my children a long time ago. And these are some kids playing on the water feature at the planetarium in New York City. And I can remember these silly little girls. And this is Isabel. She's the girl that always gets hurt, falls in the water, always breaks things. She's broken her iPhone 5 times, right? She's broken the screen. She cannot do anything without, it's her first time in life. She was probably a rabbit before she became a human. So she's bouncing around in life, and her twin sister's back there talking to her older sister, metaphysics, probably talking about what Stephen Hawking said the other day. And that's where her soul comes from. Her phone's perfect. I could sell it for what I paid for it. That's the thing. And then her sister's over there is alternative. And when we came to the ocean, they're now teenagers. But back then, they're the same people. These are exactly the same people they are today, just bigger and young women. But what is funny, she's out running ahead, they're out talking, and they're in this beautiful place on the Oregon coast. It's a sensational place on a nice day. On a not so nice day, it's not so sensational. But on that day, it's great. In New York City, in our water feature, those kids are having almost the same kind of experience in a totally different way. But they're as enthused about being there. When I watched these kids playing out there, I was surprised at how much fun they were having with their bucket. They were sitting on the water jets. They were doing everything out there. They just thought it was a gas. And what it ends up for me is this. We never leave this person in us. And when we get into landscape or architecture, we are yearning for that moment. That time when we see something new, when we see something fresh, or with new eyes. And one of the creatures, particularly for landscape architecture, are native plants and all the things that come with it. At the sculpture park, when there was a condo right across the street before we built it, and I talked to them afterwards, and they said the only thing they got there was seagulls and pigeons up on their terrace with their little garden. That's it. And after we built the sculpture park, they get hummingbirds, they get nuthatches, they get towhees, they come and visit them. They all, like a grocery store, they shoot by there and see what they got and they head back to their home. And they told me that difference makes so more important than the park. It's that they can sit and never leave the park and be influenced by that. So I'm trying to do that as much as I can wherever I go, is to build nature and wildlife back into our landscapes. And I think architecture is the perfect infrastructure to even enhance that idea. And that's what I call urban nature. Okay, that's it. All right?